Father Billy, thanks so much for being with us. We're eager to hear from you today. Could you start off with just telling us a little bit about sort of the broad outlines of your life, growing up, the path your life has taken?
Sure, thank you. It's good to be here. I was born in southwest Georgia in Worth County, in the northern part of Worth County, the area up around that sandwich between Crisp County and Turner County, up near the Oakfield, Warwick area of Worth County, but in the really, really rural part of the county. If you know that area, traveling in and out of Albany on the what we used to call the Cordell Highway, where Dole's Road is, that's the road where I grew up in that area, where my parents are buried at the church in that area. And when I was in fifth grade, the end of fifth grade year, the year that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, that was the year that we moved to Albany. I entered sixth grade in Albany. So I kind of say that I'm from Albany, but that's where I spent most of my life. But the first 11 years I was in Worth County, in the very, very rural Worth County with my parents and my brothers. My brothers are 2 years, 9 months younger than I am, and they're twins. And I always say that we lived in a little shack in that area where we had 2 rooms, not 2 bedrooms, but 2 rooms. We had a room that was what we called the front room on one side of the room, and the other room was the bedroom side of that same room. And the far side had a fireplace and 2 chairs that my parents would sit in. We had no television. We had a radio, but no television. And my brothers and I would sit on the floor. And there were 3 beds. My parents had a bed, a queen-size bed. My twin brother slept in another queen-size bed or full-size bed. And I had a little cart, a little folding bed in the center. And at night we would put it out in the middle of the floor. That's where I slept. And in the other room was the kitchen. And the kitchen had a stove and a refrigerator and a chest-sized deep freezer that we grew vegetables and canned them and put them in there. And a table, and that was it. We had an outdoor toilet, so that was it. That was where I grew up for the first 11 years of my life. And I remember very clearly in July of that year, it would have been 65, the back porch was falling down. Is that a question?
Where did you go?
Pardon me?
Where did you go to school those first 5 years?
I went to J.W. Holly High in Sylvester, which was a consolidated school that went from first grade through high school. I had a wing for the primary kids. Anyway, you went through high school. And that was the only school for blacks in the entire county. When you went beyond elementary level, there were elementary schools scattered around the county in Worth County because the younger the kids were, they tend to be in school. As they got older, for different reasons, they dropped out of school. So from middle school, junior high school, you had fewer kids in school. So by the time you got to high school, we all could fit into one school. Yeah, I went to J.W. Holly High, and oddly enough, my brother's first grade teacher was a woman named Royce Phillips, who was Herman Phillips' sister-in-law. Herman Phillips' brother, John, they lived in Albany, but they taught in Sylvester. So John and Herman all were at St. John's, and Herman is the reason why I'm in the Episcopal Church. He was my sponsor and my kid's godfather, he and Batty. So that was connection. We didn't know it at the time, but Mrs. Phillips was my brother's first grade teacher. My first grade teacher was a woman named Mrs. Price. And almost all of the teachers at that time were from Albany. They drove to Sylvester every morning, and they would drive back in the evening. So the teachers were not local. And in 1965, we moved to Albany, and I started sixth grade there and went through high school. I went to for those of you who are familiar with Albany, there were 2 junior high schools at the time for blacks in Albany. And that was Carver Junior High School, where I went, and Southside, which was out by the health department in the Fairgrounds area. And they later built River Road that became MLK. but those were the schools for blacks. And all of the kids of junior high school age went to those schools. Your classes were 40, 50 kids in the first of the year, and they would dwindle down as the year went on, but it was not unusual to have 40 kids in a class. And I went to high school. The first 2 years of my high school, I went to Monroe High School. And my senior year was the year that the mandatory desegregation went in effect. So I was transferred to Doherty High School, where I graduated. And there were 4 high schools in Albany at the time, and it was one in each of the 4 sectors of town. Doherty being on the east side, which covered a broad geographical range, because east side would cover everything from the Doherty County line out to the Worth County line on the east and down to the Mitchell County line on the east of the river. So that was a large area for the kids in those days. And that was Monroe that had the southwest part of town. And Westover was a brand new school, brand new. My 11th grade year was the first year they opened Westover, but it was not complete. So the kids met in the gymnasium, some of them. And then that was Albany High School, which is now closed, but it was the old established high school in Albany. And during the integration year at Doherty, there was no major incidents. There were incidents, I think, at some of the other schools, particularly at Albany High School, where there was a resistance for the kids coming. The only thing I remember about not feeling accepted at Doherty was near graduation. There was some concern from the white students that some of the students who were going to take part in some of the graduation ceremonies, they didn't want them to do it because they had not been here as long as we have. And I remember very clearly Connie Marks, who, I don't know if Connie's still working, but she is a professor at Albany State now, but she was going to sing the school song, and that was a big, big problem because we were the newcomers coming in, taking over. But other than that, there were no major things. I remember being in the band, and our band director had graduated from Troy State. And we would go, and Troy State's fight song was Dixie. And that was some protest to have be forced to march to and play Dixie at the Troy State, Alabama stadium. But that was the period in which I grew up. And then after high school, I went to Albany State. Well, I went to Darden College for 2 years. I got a degree in liberal arts. And the second 2 years, I went to Albany State and got a degree in speech and theater. And after college, I went to the Navy. And I spent 4 years as a communicator in the United States Navy. I got married right at the end of college. And we were stationed in California. And I have 2 sons. My oldest son, who is now a police officer in Gainesville, Georgia. He's 45. And my youngest son is a retired Army person, and he is in North Dallas in Allen, Texas. And we do every other Sunday Zoom family time now. That is really great. And I have 6 grandchildren, 5 granddaughters, and 1 grandson. My grandson is the very youngest of all of them, and he's the one in Gainesville, Georgia. And after the military, I came back to Albany, and in 1980, and I was doing substitute teaching at the time. I would take long-term sub positions. I had a long-term sub for a complicated pregnancy at Albany High, where I did a long-term whole semester of history, sub or teaching history. And then I went to Mary Acres for a long term, and then to M.L. King, where Herman Phillips was the principal at the time, who invited me into St. John's. St. John's was getting a new priest. It was Palm Sunday. Father Walker was the new priest. And I went there, and first time in an Episcopal church, and I was just awestruck by the liturgy. And for you who didn't know Father Walker, let me tell you something about Father Walker. He was kind of a large man, rotund, and he loved pageantry. And on Palm Sunday, he had a chair sitting right at the little steps, what would be the chancellor room. just in front of the altar with a big lap full of palm branches. And we had to march up and kneel before him, and he would hold a palm branch out, and you would kiss it, and he would give it to you. You would get up. And I just fell in love with that nonsense because I'd never seen anything like that before. And that was Palm Sunday that year. And the next Sunday, I had to go to my church because I was slipping to the Episcopal church, and I would go back to my church. And my church only met out in the country once a month on first Sundays. However, the folk at my church went to church every Sunday because there was an association of churches. So if this church meets on first Sunday, the next one on the second Sunday. So you went to different churches. So I would only go on first Sunday to my church. So that year, the first Sunday was the Sunday after Easter, because I went to my church for Easter, and the next Sunday I went to the Episcopal church was the Sunday after Easter, which was Low Sunday. And there was nobody there. And it was a packed house on Palm Sunday. And it was a little church, maybe it would hold 50 people most. And it was sitting shoulder to shoulder. So I asked Margaret Primo, who was the organist, where's everybody? I was here 2 weeks ago and it was packed. And she said very proudly, oh, it is Low Sunday. We don't go to church on Low Sunday. And I said, yes, you get a free Sunday off. So this is where I got to go. So I got involved. I started going to church every Sunday there, except first Sundays. I will go back to my church. And the difficult decision I had to make when my church wanted me to be a deacon in the Baptist church. And I had already been confirmed in the Episcopal church at this point. But neither church knew. The St. John's didn't know I was going back to my church every first Sunday. They knew I was away on first Sunday. I was still attending my church. They had to tell them that, I've been confirmed in another church. And that was really hard because after getting out of the military, I was one of the few who had gone to college and came back to the little country church. Everybody else couldn't wait to get out of there. They would move to Atlanta, New York, and other places. But I had come back after being in California. I was back. And now I was going to leave them too. And I remember a woman who got right in my face and shook her finger in my face. Her name was Miss Carrie Peavy. And they couldn't even pronounce the word Episcopal. Didn't know what it was. But she said, I don't care where you go and what church you go to. Just remember you found Jesus here. And I simply said, yes, ma'am. And it was very hard for me to tell my parents that I had joined another church, and I'd even told them about it. But they were very supportive. My mother lived to see me get ordained and very supportive. But that was kind of how I got to the Episcopal church. But it was through the invitation of the principal at the school where I was substituting, who was Herman Phillips. And Zibby would know Herman Phillips. Herman and Maddie were longtime members of St. John's, Albany. And that was when St. John's was a separate church from St. Mark's. And that's how I got started. I don't know if I answered the question or even talked too much about it, but.
That was great. What was the racial composition of St. John's in the early 80s when you first started going there?
St. John's in the early 80s was all white. Sorry, all black. There were no white members of St. John's. The only time we saw white people there was when the bishop came. Bishop Reeves was the bishop when I was confirmed, and his wife was Adele, I believe was her name. And what I remember about her, she would come and hold her purse the whole time under her arm like somebody was going to take it away from her. But they would come in the afternoon. The bishop would come on Sunday afternoon after he had visited St. Paul's, one of the other churches, in the morning. And we had an afternoon visit. And we would clean up the church, make sure the grass was cut, wash the pews down. The bishop is coming, the bishop is coming. Like, who is the bishop? I don't care about the bishop. He's messed up my day. I got to come back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to see the bishop. But that's what it was. The bishop came once a year in the evening, and he made his customary visit. He was gone. We didn't see the bishop again.
So, Billy, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your your spiritual journey, right? So you were raised in a Baptist church with your family, and then you attended the Episcopal church, and you were just taken in by the liturgy. And so, what was happening internally? What was happening with you internally as a young boy, and how you were, spiritually formed, and then transitioning over to the Episcopal?
My spiritual formation was intact. I just had a long interview a couple of days ago for Virginia Seminary Alumni Magazine, and that was one of the questions they asked me. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a Baptist minister. My parents went to different churches. My mother did not go to my father's family church. They're both buried there now. But as little children, particularly my mother, we could hear her pray, and that used to just break my heart to hear her pray about struggles at night. And, like I said, we were poor as I grew up. We all lived in a two-room shack with no running water or plumbing. But I would hear my mom pray all the time for a better life or a better day. And that always moved me. And I as far as spiritually, we could not get baptized until we were 12 years old. And we had to profess a faith that we knew our sins had been forgiven. And I've told this story a number of times, is that I flunked Baptism 101 because we was called the mourner's bench or the sinner's bench. You sit in the front of the church for 2 weeks, and all these people gather around you and you pray. You get on the floor. The first week was just speak about prayer, praying that our souls be saved. You have these long prayers, and you would get down, and some of the kids would fall asleep because the prayers were so long. And the second week, an evangelist would come and preach these long sermons for the whole week, and hopefully you would join the church one of those 5 days when the evangelist came. But I was so serious about it, and we went the revival the last 2 weeks of July. And in South Georgia, there were thunderstorms almost every afternoon. But all of the kids who joined the church, they said they prayed to God that their sins be forgiven, and God gave them a sign, and it was a thunderclap at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm thinking, I heard that too, but God hasn't told me anything. So we went through the whole week like that, and that first year, on that last night, I was the last one left on the mourner's bench, on the sinner's bench. But Jesus hadn't said anything to me. And I couldn't lie and say that, I prayed for a rain shower at 2 o'clock, because that stuff happened every day in South Georgia. Because when we worked in the fields, we had to go to the shade because it was raining out when we were picking cotton and stuff like that. So at the end of the year, I had to repeat. I had to go back to what I call repeaters mourners bench school the next year. So in 1966, that first night, the same evangelist came back. His name was Reverend Bass, a little short, rotund man. He preached this long sermon. He came out on the floor at the end in front of the bench and said, will you come to Jesus? And I said, yes, Lord, I'm going to Jesus. So I went to Jesus, and everybody started shouting and jumping up and down. And I'm thinking, I don't know what y'all shouting about, but I'm not going to be in this bitch next year again. Because I'm 13. The 12-year-old looking at me like, what's wrong with you? Why are you on the bench with us? We're 12 and you're 13. Why are you still here? So I got off that bench. And I don't know, and I always say I do believe in affirmation of calling from the people. But I tell people, and I told the interviewer the other week, that I didn't hear Jesus say anything to me that my sins were forgiven, but I trusted. The one thing I knew, I was not going to do that again next year. And I think it worked. It's been about 55 years ago, so I think it worked. But to answer your question, I've always had a strong spirituality. So my coming to the Episcopal Church for me was not about getting a stronger spirituality or spiritual life. It was incorporating the liturgy in my practice. So that was different for me, and I loved it. I loved the music. We didn't have accompanied music, not because it was any kind of theological thing. We had a piano, but nobody could play it. And it was just there as furniture. And snakes would get in the piano. That was another thing. Snakes would get in the piano because the church said idle all week, all month, except that one Sunday. And they had a guy once come to play the piano. He was trying to pedal, and the pedal wouldn't pedal because it wouldn't depress. And a snake crawled out. And somebody said snake, and that whole first part of the church cleared out. Which was another thing in my little church. The men sat on the left side of the church. All of the women sat on the right side of the church. The little kids could sit with their moms if they were boys, but the sexes didn't mix in my church. And the older lady in the church always wore white, so you know who the mother of the church was. She was the oldest female, and my mother became the mother of the church before she died. And they always wore white hat, everything year-round to church, and you knew that was the oldest woman in the church, and she was called the mother of the church. So anyway, that was about my spiritual life. Although my brothers took a different journey than I did. They got on the mourner's bench too, and when they got off that mourner's bench, I think they took it as a license to leave church. It was graduation from church. They stopped going. The other thing about that, and I will share this about my being very serious about this very early on, is that we only had communion in that church once a quarter. And if you had not been baptized, you had to leave the church during the communion service. It was the worship service, and it was a separate service for communion. And they asked all unbaptized people to leave. Well, I could not wrap my head around that because I'm not baptized because you will not allow it until I'm 12. And now you kick me out. Well, about 100 yards from the church was a little juke joint. And the lady who had the juke joint was in the congregation. Name was Miss Lee Fowler. All the kids would go to Miss Lee's juke joint and play the jukebox. They called the jukebox a piccolo. So it was set real loud. The volume was really, really loud. So they would go down there and put money in like a quarter. They would put it in and play 3 songs for a quarter. But it would blast back up to the church, and the folks in the church would get mad because all the kids that they kicked out of church go to the juke joint and play music that disrupted church. But I didn't go to listen to juke joint. I would go and try to peek through the window to see what they were doing for communion. And they would have this table up front with the little shot glasses underneath, and it was a white thing draped over it. It was really mysterious to me. And they would say things, lift the sheet up, and they would pour the wine and all this stuff, and they would pass it around to everybody. And I was just trying to figure out, what are they doing? Well, when I was baptized on August 6, 1966, that Sunday, I was the only one baptized that day. I went to the river off of Mercer Mill Plantation on Cordial Highway. It was a little creek there. Going to, I don't know, maybe if you remember, there was a black and white fence of that plantation, Mercer Mill. Anyway, it was a mill ground in place there. That's where we were baptized, and we went back to church that day. And that was the first Sunday that I could take communion. They gave what was called the right hand of fellowship, where I was welcome, where every member of the church walked around that morning and shook hands for me. It was called the right hand of welcome and fellowship. And I was able to take communion. And when I got communion, I literally cried in church. They thought I had the Holy Ghost. I did not have the Holy Ghost. I was so disappointed with communion because I thought it was something else. It was saltines broken up and Welch's grape juice. I was so hurt that all those years I peeked through that window trying to figure out what they were doing. And they were having saltines and Welch's grape juice. Well, we had that at home. That was nothing mysterious or special to me. So that's how serious I've always been about my faith and what we were doing, even at an early age. Because I was baptized at 13, and prior to that, I was kicked out of church, but I wanted to know what they were doing. So, yeah.
Billy, you are just such an incredible storyteller.
And it is all true.
Oh no, I know, but you really do know how to tell the story of your life, and I know that we certainly won't finish today, but maybe we could start though with this question, or end with this question, I guess. So from junior high, high school, those years, those teenage years and beyond, until you got your footing as a Black man in this country, do you recall some of the things that, some of the events or some of the activities that sort of allowed you to continue in your faith? What were the things that occurred along the way that you knew that this faith, this belief in Jesus, this walking this journey was the appropriate path for you?
I have to attribute it to my mom. She had a very strong faith, and my father was always present in the house, but my father could not read or write. My mother had a very limited education. She had, I think, like 6th grade education. So, but she was always supportive and encouraging of all three of us, particularly me. And I always thought she was so hard on me. Before, I didn't go to kindergarten because where we lived, but I guess I must have been 4 or 5. I could write in cursive. Everything that my mom had learned in her schooling days, I knew it as well because she tutored me every single day. I was not good at math, and she had a stick, and I would sit there trying to do my math, and she would crack me across my back, and I would get all confused and I start making more mistakes. But she was very, very tough, and she would always say, "You got to learn this to get through life." I didn't have an opportunity, but you do. So she was very, very stern and very strict on me, and I saw her faith. My mom's mother died when she was young. And she says she doesn't remember her mom, but she was, I think, like the 4th child of 9. But she said that my grandfather, her dad, even though he was a minister, was not very good to all those kids. And so she was very protective of us. I was coming of age when the movement was going on in Albany, and Dr. King would come in and out of Albany, but she would not let us be a part of that. My mother, I remember my mother saying, even when we lived in the country, there was a lady that Mrs. Jones, her daughter was getting married, and she asked my mom if she would come and work for her. And she said, "No, I don't work in white people's houses." And she would always tell us to be mindful, you got to make a living, but don't lower yourself if you don't have to be someone's servant. So she was very good at that. And my mother was always one to, that was a song, is that you could squeeze a dollar and make the eagle grin. My mother could squeeze a dollar and make the eagle grin. Because I knew, even as I grew older, with my parents not having the education, I knew when I was in 6th grade, I was the one who had to read all the mail. I knew what their responsibilities were, to write all the correspondence for them. And my father would bring them money, and I had to go pay all the bills. So very early on, I taught responsibility. I was taught responsibility, but my mom trusted me even at 12, 13 years old to do those kind of things. So I remember I would leave East Albany where we live and go downtown, pay all the bills, all of the family's money as a 13-year-old. And then go back. I had to walk. Didn't have any other transportation. But that was never an issue. And because I was a nerd, we didn't go out. My mother had a rule, is that, the old thing, when the street light come on, you had to be in the yard. But there was no street light where we lived. But you had to be in the yard before the sun went down. And if there were other kids at home with us playing, she would tell them, "Go home, your mother isn't the way you are." But we had to be at home. So I never went out as a kid. I never went to dances or proms, anything like that. And I was so frail and thin, I didn't weigh 100 pounds until I got in like 10th grade. I always feel like I was as tall as I am now, but I was stuck at 97 pounds forever. I could not gain any more weight. And when I finally got to 102, I got to 112. I got in college and I got up to like 127, and I stuck there forever. But I've always been thin, so I was always tall and awkward. So I poured myself into studies into music. And in those days, in junior high school choir, we sang all the old spirituals and gospel songs in choir. We had to learn them by heart. So all the songs, we knew those. And with that came a certain amount of spiritual teaching and spirituality. Mm-hmm. And some of the kids, even in choir in junior high school, would get happy in choir. And happy means that they were being moved by the Spirit. And oh, let me go back just a second about getting happy. One of my jobs when I was finally baptized and received the right hand of fellowship was I became an usher. Both my parents were ushers. My father in his church was an usher. My mother was an usher, and I became an usher. And ushers wore this little star on their chest that said usher, but it looked like a sheriff star. And they were the bosses in church. Kids could not chew gum. They would make you spit it out. If you came late, the usher said when you could come in the building or not, those kinds of things. But one of the jobs of the ushers was to hold people when they got happy. So if they got overwhelmed by the Spirit, you had to catch them so they didn't fall. But I learned something from my mother. My mother taught me that if they get happy, Jesus will take care of them. Don't you break your back and strain yourself trying to hold them. Let them hit the floor. Jesus will take care of them because the Spirit is in them. So I learned very early on was that when people got happy and ran around and screamed and fall out, you make sure they don't get hurt and take their glasses off and that kind of stuff. But don't try to pick them up. They were a little too large for both of us. Yes, Zippy.
I can't help this, but that is so not a part of the Episcopal
No, it is
worship.
not.
At least it hasn't been my experience. I've been to some pretty charismatic Episcopal churches, but getting happy or being slain in the Spirit was not. Is that something you missed? Is that something you discouraged once you became a priest?
No, I didn't do it. My mom didn't do it. As a matter of fact, of all my mother's sisters, there were 9 of them. My mother had 6 sisters and 2 brothers. She was the only one that didn't get slain in the Spirit. She didn't shout. So I remember very clearly my mother's older sister, my Aunt Fanny, would if the preacher got up and moaned once, she would fall out. So my mother told my Aunt Fanny she said, Fanny girl, you stop this because you didn't put on the deodorant this morning. And you are musty as all get up. Thank God I'm the one smelling you this morning. Indecent. My mother was frank.
It wasn't.
Huh? But my mother didn't shout, so I don't miss that part of it because it wasn't part of our house.
So it was all done in decency.
And not that it wasn't sincere,
Gotcha,
but I used to wonder why all my aunts shouted, my mom did not. But I knew she was very spiritual. But I learned that from her, so I didn't miss it. And that was another thing too, is that I was not as demonstrative in my worship in the Baptist church, and I always kind of felt out of place. So I get to the Episcopal church, and the organ plays you stand up and sing, and the organ stops you sit down. If there's 4 verses, you sing 4 verses, and you stop at the end of the 4th verse. And in my church, if the minister said, let's sing that again, you just keep on going, maybe 10 minutes on the same song. The choir singing the same words over and over again. So I don't miss that at all. But it was different, and I just fell in love with the liturgy. It was a Palm Sunday liturgy that got me. And the chanting and that kind of stuff. And I've been singing in choir. I sang with the Alban Choral Society and now the Augusta Choral Society and all those groups. I sang in college. I sang at Darden College. I did not sing at Alban. Instead, I was in the theater department there. And I had to have play practice there every afternoon. But
so the first time you took communion in the Episcopal Church, was it a very different experience for you from when you had communion at your first church?
It was in a way, and in one way it was the same. The one thing different was the wine. And what my mom would call them, they're drinking liquor in church. They had liquor. But other than that, I guess the thing that was different is that I could see what the priest was doing because he was facing the people. And as a child, even though I was looking through the window, they had this white thing up, and it was like a veil over it, and they were behind it doing stuff. What I call hocus pocus. They were putting Jesus in, hocus pocus. They would put it back down and pick it up. And when I finally got to see what was it in that communion, it was saltines and crackers. But the wafer and the wine, I could see that. And the priest would hold it up so you could see it. There was no secrets about it. So that was a mystery about that as I watched it. Then when I got to take it, it was wine. And so, but I think the spirituality of communion was about the same, because I did learn to accept in my first church what communion was for them, and it became that for me too. It was just that very first time. It was not what I was expecting.
And it brought you to tears. It made you cry. Your disappointment.
Yeah, but it wasn't the Holy Ghost. They thought I was crying because they thought I was crying because I was filled with the Holy Ghost. No, it was not.
They thought you were happy.
Yeah. I was disappointed.
So thank you very much for being with us again, Father Billy. When we last left off last time, you were talking about joining the Episcopal Church, having come from a Baptist background, and the appeal of the Episcopal Church. And I guess one thing I'm curious about, I think a lot of people who don't live in Albany know of Albany and civil rights. And at the time that you joined the Episcopal Church there in Albany, did it seem to be a church that was connected to or had been connected to civil rights struggles in Albany in a kind of active way?
No, at least from my recollection. You may interview someone else from there and may say yes, because they may want to hope that was the case. But as I joined it, I did not. And I attributed some of that. I think I shared with you that I joined that church because I fell in love with the liturgy. And that is what attracted me. But so many of the folk who were at St. John's at the time was what I would describe as middle class, upper middle class Black people. And they didn't get involved in the civil rights. Well, my mother was not, and that is I said that it's not to be a blanket statement, but that was what I observed, that the people who were members there were by and large college professors and those kind of professionals, and you didn't see them out on picket lines or marching. I'm sure they may have supported in other ways, but that was not openly displayed at the church. But I have to also say that my mom, who was not in that category at all, and this church and these people that I was going to go to church, we were told to fall into her, she wouldn't take part in it either. So when the march would take place, she would not let us go to those things. My mother was very protective. We had to be in the yard at a certain time as a young adolescent. And now that I look back on it, I have myself and my brothers are twins. She was kind of overly protected because we had moved from the country when I was 12 or 13. 12, because I was going in 6th grade. And we were moving into the big city, even though Albany was not that big a city in those days. I think in the old days, when you ranked the cities, I recall they had rankings on the license plates on your cars. I don't know if you remember that. And in those days, Albany was number 10. Then it moved to number 8, and I think to number 6. But it was way down the list as far as the size of cities in the state. But for us coming from nowhere in Worth County, it was a big city. And she didn't want us to be corrupted by the boys in the towns or end up, as my mother would say, in juvenile court. And we were always terrified of juvenile court. My mother would pray in church during prayer meeting time, and she would pray that her boys had never been to juvenile court. And my brothers and I would look at each other just out of horror. Why does she tell all our business in church all the time in these prayers? But she was protective, and she did not. So as a result, I didn't have a big deal with the congregation not being involved in the civil rights marches because it was not a part of my upbringing either. So, and that may be the reason why I got so much involved in it and interested in it later, out of some sense of guilt of not being more involved when that was an epicenter in many ways in the South for civil rights movement. And I guess for the same reason of what I saw as complacency there at the church, and with even my mother's own attitudes around it, what led Dr. King and Taylor Branch's book, Part of the War, to say that Albany was probably Dr. King's worst failure. He could not break through there because of the apathy of so many people there. But now, 50 years later, you would think that it was the mecca of civil rights for everybody. Everybody said they marched with Dr. King. Well, that train would still be coming to the station if that was the case. So it was not the case.
How was the transition for you from high school into college, and how did your church help or hinder with that?
Well, when I went to college, I was not in the Episcopal Church. I did not join the Episcopal Church until after the Navy. So I was an adult at that time. But when I was in that first class of mandated integration. So I had gone 11 years through public school and segregated schools. And even though at Doherty High School, there were no major incidents to resist that, what I did notice is that the year that I graduated, a lot of the teachers left and went to Deerfield and other places and taught at the private academies. They did not stay there. I remember, I'm not going to call any names, but I took sociology and psychology from the same teacher who was a relative of Rosalind Carter. And this person, they were first cousins, as a matter of fact, looked a lot alike. This person left, and I saw her at the Albany Little Theater where I was very much involved years ago. And her daughter was now, I think, in either middle school or high school. And she felt the need, she didn't recognize me, so I told her I was, and she had been my sociology and psychology teacher in high school. And she felt the need to justify to me why she left. And that was not the reason I was introduced myself to her. As a matter of fact, the child that she had was, I think that she gave birth to that child during that period. But it was about she wanted to be a stay-home mom and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that was something to the reason why you left. And there were others. My physiology teacher also left. And I think, now, I think there was a little more tension as far as the schools at Albany High than it was at Doherty High, where I graduated. But we didn't see it as anything really major because technically Doherty High School was our neighborhood school. We were being bused all the way across to the other side of town to Monroe. So when we were sent to Doherty in the year 71, all of the black kids were kids we knew already. So we only went in with the white kids. And so it wasn't a matter of whether they accepted us or not, because we had each other kind of to support each other. And then when I went to college, my first 2 years, I went to Darden College. So I never had a problem with it. I went to Albany State for my second 2 years because I had to work my way through school, so it was easier to work. In the first 2 years, I was still living at home, and I got an apartment in my last 2 years. But that was the reason why I went to those two schools. But I didn't have a problem with it. I will say this, though, for my own reasons, and I've said this before, and some people think surprised that I would say this. At the time of integration, I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to us. I really did, because there was such care given to us by our teachers those first 11 years. I mean, everything from not only teaching academic, but social graces and manners. I remember my course teacher, I may have said this once before, she was the epitome of a lady. She walked through high school with a purse hanging on her arm all day. She walked around, had her gloves stuffed in there. But if she saw you walk through a door and then look back as a young man, and she called all of us young man and sir and mister. But if she saw you go through a door and look back to see if there was a young lady behind you, you didn't hold the door for her, she would chew you out right there on the spot. Young man, go back and hold that door for that lady. And young lady, look at your posture. You got to walk upright, that kind of stuff. And we kind of lost that because that was seen, I thought, as discipline. And you didn't want certain teachers discipline your children. So parents resisted that. And that was a custom. When I was in school through middle school, we actually got whippings for academics. I was a terrible speller, so I knew when we had a spelling test, I was going to have to get a whipping. I knew it, so I just prepared for it. And you got beaten in your hand in front of the class by the teachers. And this was public school, and you didn't dare tell anybody about it. But I bet you practiced those spelling words because that was just the way it was. If the teacher said to us, you have a test this week, and the passing grade is 80. You said, well, what happened to 70? 70 is mediocre. You will make an 80 to pass in this class. That's what they said. And you didn't go to the principal and say, oh, she set the grade up to 80 and it should be 70. You worked to make that 80. Because they would tell you, you're going to go to college. And we just did it. And I saw that as being lost when we went to the other school. So anyway, but that happened a whole lot earlier than my going off to college. We had to have support of the Episcopal Church. And with my my church where I grew up, they were really, really proud because no one had gone off in that generation. Some of the kids of that generation were going off, but the weird thing about it, I may have shared this before, is that they didn't come back home. When they went to college, they moved on someplace else. They got jobs in Atlanta, moved to Jacksonville, someplace else. So when I got out of the Navy, I came back home. And they wanted to make me a deacon in my church. And that's when I had a dilemma. I'd already been confirmed in the Episcopal Church. I had to tell them. And they couldn't even pronounce the word Episcopal. So yeah, that was later.
I'm curious, the sense of loss that you're reflecting on. I've heard that from echoes of that from many people who lived through kind of the change. And I'm curious if you felt that sense of loss at the time, like as a 17, 18-year-old, or if it's something you see more in reflection as you kind of look back on things.
Some of both. Because it was sold to us as the opportunity to get better books and this and this and this, and you had a better education, you can have access. And some of that was true. We got to Doherty High School, there were labs, and there were microscopes in all the labs. You didn't have 2 microscopes for 30 kids to share, that kind of a thing. So some of that, but I think the other part of it was important. For what we had, the academic part of it was rigorous. I just remember being in literature classes, both world literature and American literature. Had American literature in 10th grade, world literature in 11th grade. You would just hate when that bell rang because you were in the middle of this stuff and you don't want to leave. And I remember Miss Veal would say, "Get out of here, y'all go! I got another class coming." We was, tell us more, tell us more. And it was that kind of thing. I don't know, but as time went on, I could look back. I guess not so much with me, but for those who came behind me, I could just see what I appear to be a lack of interest, a care in what they were learning and what they were achieving. Anything they would do would be okay. I got to submit this. Little things. I was very shy, but I was always caught talking in class. And we had to write punishment stuff. I would not talk in class 500 times, and you couldn't use a copy machine or duplicate. Well, it wasn't copy machine, it was duplicating paper to do it at that time. And you would do that, but you wouldn't let your mom see you writing those lines at home because she knew you were getting in trouble. But now kids would curse teachers out. I know for a fact because I got cursed out at Mary Acres by a kid in the 7th grade. So it was just different. Even the dress code, there were a certain way you had to dress. If we wore T-shirts with blue jeans, and you had to be very careful about wearing blue jeans in those days, but you had to have a shirt with a collar on it and a pocket on the shirt. You couldn't wear any kind of advertisement on a T-shirt. It was just strict. So I felt that was relaxed in a lot of ways, and that the teachers and the administration just didn't care. I said, oh, this is a mistake, but there's a downward spiral now that these kids are going to get in trouble in a few years because they're getting through the system and they feel okay about making it through, but nobody cares. But then we're still here, or 50 years later, because I'm getting ready to celebrate my 50th year high school class reunion this summer, and we're still here. But personally, and many of my classmates, as we talk, and I'm on that planning committee, we talk about those days, how when we look back 50 years ago, how we hated some of the discipline that we had to go through, but now we appreciate it when we see what's going on now.
So can you transition between being a teacher to becoming a priest? What was that? What was that all about, and how did that happen and work?
I will tell you very simple, a good cursing out. When that young man cursed me out, I said this, because I was already in the process, and I was going very slow because, did I share with y'all last time about my having repeat baptism class because I was waiting for Jesus to talk to me and Jesus didn't? So I've been very careful about trying to process, get things in order. So I was already in the process for ordination and discernment things. I talked to bishopships at that time, but I was moving kind of slow on it. And that morning when that young man told me what he was going to do to me, and I'm just thinking, this is too early in the morning to have done to me what you just told me you're going to do. You know, I can't put up with this. And he said it in the class when everyone in the class just went wild. And it was interesting because they had these kids grouped into sections, and I had from a level 2 grouping the kids up to a level 5, from the slowest of academics to the smartest. And on each end of it, they worked you to death. The slow ones took all your energy, and the smart ones, you had to always be ahead of them to keep them interested. And their parents, because their parents looked at their papers when you graded them and sent them home, they will call you up and say, what do you mean, question my child on this sentence or whatever it is. So, but that morning, I just said, you know, I heard Jesus' voice in the strangest kind of way today. That young man cursed me out. I think that was Jesus telling me to get out of here. So I told Father Carter. Father Carter was the bishop's, I think they called him a bishop's deputy at that time. I said, Father Carter, I think I'm ready to go for my interview to the seminary. So I went to the seminary to interview, and I got there, and I said, oh, no, I can't do this. So I told Father Carter, I can't do it. So he thought I was crazy. Well, when are you going to make up your mind? You know, you put us off, and now you're saying. So I'm really grateful for their sticking with me, and they're seeing a call in me when I was so much on the fence trying to get these absolute signs for this. Is Jesus calling me? I don't know. I had the same problem when I was 12 with baptism. And I just realized you got to go with trust and faith. But to answer your question very simply, that young man cursing out that morning, second period in the morning, my first period was a planning period. So second period of the day, this young man, I mean, I had been in the Navy. I thought I knew how to curse myself. This young man cursed me using poetry. And I said, my God, I can't let you do to me what you said you're going to do. And I just told the principal at the end of the day that, you know, I can't deal with this anymore. So when I didn't renew my contract that April, then he called me in. I said, you know, I think I'm going to go to seminary. And I think he thought I couldn't handle the class. And that may have been it. But Jesus spoke to me very clearly that morning in a way that I listened. I heard Jesus' voice. And this young man was 14 in 7th grade when he should have been gone 2 years earlier. He'd been held back. But I tell you what, I passed him on that year. He got out of my class. He wasn't coming back to me anymore. So, and that is not a good thing to do, but he had to move on.
Thank you.
Erin, can you pause the recording for just a moment?
Yeah.
Sorry. This is great.
Okay, so Billy, can you tell us a little bit about your seminary experience and maybe your early years as a priest?
My seminary experience was a wonderful experience for me. With my vacillation and not starting when I should have started, I ended up with the perfect class. The class ahead of me, it was a very small class, a lot of overachievable, formal professionals that every 5 minutes talk about what they used to be. I'm thinking, you're not that anymore. You're in seminary with the rest of us, but it used to be these attorneys and these docs, whatever, but you're not that anymore. I ended up with a very large class. And we were so supportive, and we are very close even now. Almost this May 14th, our graduation date will be 29 years, I guess, since we graduated. But we're very, very close. And oddly enough, I had an interview with for this issue of the seminary magazine that's coming out in May. And the person who interviewed me was a board trustee person, but who was in that class ahead of me. And she had been a, what you call those attorneys for the, like what Rudy Giuliani used to be. She was one of those kind of lawyers.
Prosecuting.
Public defender or prosecutor?
No, it's whatever, like Rudy Giuliani was something for the Southern District of New York.
Oh, attorney general?
No, whatever it was, she used to say it all, even in her sermons in class. So she said to me, I don't know if you remember me when I was in seminary, but I vaguely remember you. And she said, I was, and I finished the sentence for her because she talked about it all the time. I had a wonderful time in seminary. The 3 years went by really fast for me. And so when I hear people talk about they had a horrible time, particularly Black students, I feel kind of out of place. Is how do I say that I had a wonderful time? Don't get them upset with me. To say, oh, well, of course you would have had a wonderful time because you were kissed up or whatever it is. That's in my head thinking. And I know, and I'll call this person name because I don't think they mind me calling it. Kim Jackson, who's a priest in Atlanta, and she's also a newly elected senator for the state of Georgia. She has said many times, even at board trustee meetings, what a horrible time she had there. And for other reasons, but I didn't have that issue. And when I've been elected twice for the Alumni Association, the Executive Committee of the Alumni Association, and 2 times I've served as president of that organization. And I'm finishing up my presidency right now for the 2nd time and the end of the 3-year process. And with that process, I go to trustee meetings. That's what I did the last time we met. I had to go, and we have one next week because of the issues with General Seminary that we are involved with that. But as I listen to those meetings, and this dean who is British doesn't come with the same kind of baggage, and I have a very, very good relationship with him. And I'll share this with you because it says a lot. Dean Markham and Barney Hawkins, who's the alumni person, Virginia Seminary gets lots of money from the Coca-Cola Foundation every year. And they come to the board meetings annually. And so when they were coming down 3 years ago, I guess now 2.5 years ago, they asked to meet with me and they said, we're going to be in Atlanta. We will drive to Augusta or you can meet us halfway. We want to talk to you about something, a proposal. And I said, well, there's nothing halfway between Atlanta and Augusta, so I might as well come to Atlanta. So I went to Atlanta. We met at the Piedmont Driving Club. I didn't know the Piedmont Driving Club exists. And I met them there, and they said, we got there about the same time, but I want to be sure I was there first. And so the dean asked, would you like a drink? And I said, no, I don't want a drink. I want to be perfectly sober. So whatever you propose to me, I know what I'm saying yes or no to. So he said, I'll get right to the point. We want you to serve as one of the co-chairs on the capital campaign. I said, serve as a co-chair? He said, yes, I would like you to serve as one of the co-chairs on the Division for Dioceses and Parishes. And I said, I think y'all got me mixed up with somebody else. I don't have the money or the prestige to squeeze bucks out of alumni and donors for the seminary that you all think I may have. And he said to me, no, you do. He said, this is your second time serving on this alumni board, isn't it? And I said, yes. He said, I don't know if you know this, but you get elected by a broad range of alumni votes. Whereas most folks who get elected, it's a narrow window of people that they know them around the classes they were in. But he said, your votes go all the way across many, many classes because people know you. And for no other reason, that's why we want you. But we want your money too. So in December, all of the board trustee members, including the board president, because I serve in that capacity, had to have an interview with the dean, an evaluation with the dean. And that was part of the strategic plan that this stuff was recorded. But it was to be a 90-minute interview. And I'm thinking, what in the world can I talk to this man for 90 minutes about? Well, basically, these kind of questions you all are asking me, how did I get to the Episcopal Church and all this stuff? And why do you support Virginia Seminary? Why would you take your time to come back and serve on a board for 2 different times that take up 3 years of your time? Those kinds of questions. And I shared with him that I come from a very different tradition. I came from a Baptist tradition where no one in my family is a part of this. When my marriage failed, my wife went back to the Baptist church and so did my children. They got out of Dodge. And my oldest son is very active in a Pentecostal church in Gainesville, Georgia. My youngest son, I don't think he goes to church a lot because he called me a few years ago. He was so proud he had gotten baptized again. And I said, what? Baptized again? You already baptized. So, but I don't think he goes a lot. But I told the dean all this stuff. And I said, you know, I'm an anomaly to many of my family members, especially my family members on my daddy's side of the family. My mother's father was a minister. And I was born and raised in my early years around my daddy's folk. My grandmother drank booze, alcohol. My aunt sold alcohol. She stayed drunk all the time. And my mother's father was a minister, very pious, but didn't treat his children fair according to them. So I was caught in this dilemma with these people. And so the dean said to me, I would like to do something for you. If you can get all of your family members to come to Alexandria one weekend in the summer when school is out, I will give you the run of this campus with them from a Thursday to a Monday morning. He said, one condition, we would like to do a service on Sunday to honor you. And I said, no, I will not do that. He said, we want your family to know how proud we are of you at this institution and what you mean to us. And you came to us fully formed with your Christian foundation when you came to the Episcopal Church. And I thought that was a wonderful idea. He just made that offer to me in December. And I don't know if I can pull that off, but it's a wonderful idea. He said, you're going to get here on your own, but once you get here, everything else is taken care of while you're here from a Thursday evening to a Monday. So I thought that was just nice. And this man doesn't really know me that well because he's been dean 14 years, but he came after I left. But when I go back to the campus, and I go back at least once a year, but often sometime more than that, for some reason, a lot of the professors who have come after me want to talk. And I think, you know, you're wasting your time. I don't have anything to say. But they seem to be so interested. You know, Dr. Catherine Sungerberger, I think this woman is brilliant. And when I was there in February a year ago, she was my dinner partner at dinner. And she said, and want to pick my brain. I said, you know, forget it. I want to know what you're thinking right now. because you're the professor writing all the books. You're the smart one. But in many ways, I feel honored to have come from a very humble background and at least feel that I have something to contribute to our church and to the discussion, whereas I have never thought much about it. In many ways, I always thought that it's what everybody's supposed to do. And I think that's one reason why I took 12-year-old getting baptized very serious, because I really believed it. I believed in communion so strongly that when I saw saltines and wine, grape juice, I cried like a baby. Because I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't saltines and Welch's grape juice. It just was not supposed to be that. So I think sometimes I may take stuff too serious and think through too much, as I did with trying to decide to go to seminary. And it needs the very sharp tongue of Jesus through a 14-year-old kid cursing me out to say, let's get moving. And I'd be most humble for Ian Malcolm to say to me, as a British person looking at this from with another lens, I would love to let your family know what a gift they have given to Virginia Seminary and the church through you. And I didn't know how to say, just say thank you. I said, oh, no, we can't do that. I don't want any spotlight on me. I don't want any attention on me. I said, first of all, they'll come here and see morning prayer or some worship service with Anglican chant. They're going to break out of here and go running because they can't shout on that kind of music. So,
I'm curious, when you were in seminary, what the racial composition of the student body and even the faculty was like, and then sort of maybe going back a little bit also, when you were going through discernment in the diocese, were there Black priests at that point? And what role did that play, or did the absence of it play? It's sort of a two-part question.
I'll start with the second half of the question first. When I went through discernment, my own priest at St. John's at the time was a Black priest who was fairly new. As I told you, Father Walker was the priest when I first visited the Episcopal Church, and he left. And Father Bernard Rossa, who grew up at St. Matthew's, Savannah, and he went to General Seminary, and when he got out of seminary, he was placed at St. John's, Albany, but he also had to cover Good Shepherd, Thomasville. And that's more I probably would say about that, but not while the button is being mashed. I have to say that off the record, but I just didn't feel supported there. So in my struggles, I had to work it out for myself. I didn't have anybody to say, do this or this. And I don't know what the reason for that was, but it didn't happen. As far as other priests, the only other active priest in the diocese would have been Father Rossa. There had been some priests at St. Matthew's, Savannah. Father Hoskin was there at the time. He was active at St. Matthew's, Savannah. And there had been some other Black priests, mainly from the Caribbean. Father Portier, I believe, had been there, and some others at St. Matthew's, Savannah. But in the western part of the state where I would have been familiar with clergy, Bernard Rossa was the only Black priest there. So I didn't have a model. And when I got to the seminary, there was one Black professor, systematic theology, Dr. Eversley. I don't know, he was from one of the Caribbean islands. He was very British. He was Black, but he was very British. And I just felt that he was just awfully hard on me. And maybe he was back to the old day when I talked about in high school. The only time I've ever got in any kind of debate with a professor in class was in his class on the meaning of truth. I can talk about that later at some point, but that was very awkward. And he came to Augusta once since I've been here. I think somebody at St. Augustine had a baptism. He was a preacher or something. This was years ago, John. But he came, he never looked me up. He knew I was here. I never said anything. I found out about it later, and I was really hurt that Dr. Everson came right here and did not even say hello. But anyway, he was the only one, and the only other black people from the institution would have been in the refectory. The people who washed dishes and cleaned the tables, even all the cooks were white, so that was the makeup there. And in the classes, the class ahead of me, the one that Christine was in, I told you about earlier, they had 2 black females in that class, but they both were coming to Virginia to get their Anglican study credits. They had gone to Howard University first to get their MDiv degree, but if they're going to be ordained in the Episcopal Church, they had to get what we call Anglican dipped. I don't know what y'all call that. It's a 1-year gym, but we call it to be dipped. So that they were coming to get dipped. So they were only doing 1 year, but they were graduating in the class ahead of me. And in that was 3, I'm sorry. John Harmer was in that class. And John was also a 1-year student, he was from Liberia. I think he had gone to Cutter College, and he went to someplace else, but he was only a 1-year student. So they had 2 females and 1 male in that class. And the class ahead of that had 3 males. Carl Wright, who is currently the Bishop of the Armed Forces, was in that class. Harold Cobb, who's the Rector of Grace in Norfolk, Virginia, was in that class. And someone else. There were 3 in that class. So in each class, there were no more than 3. In my class, there were 2 American blacks, myself and Von Booker, and Theodore Brooks, who is now a priest in the Bronx. She was also from Liberia. And Theodore is also on the alumni committee with me. And that was it. So at any given time, you would have maybe less than 10 blacks in all the 3 classes on campus. But that could be deceiving because you show up, that school had a lot of Africans there. So you may have 30 Africans over the 3 classes who were there studying from various countries. But as far as American blacks, that was no more than over the 3 classes, maybe 9 to 10.
If I can ask a quick follow-up on that, I mean, did the overwhelming whiteness of either the VTS or just the diocese ever make you doubt, like, do I really want to pursue this, or did that not really?
It did not. As a matter of fact, I think just the opposite happened, because I realized the church that I was in. I realized if I was going to minister, I was going to be ministering for the most part, unless I get into all black congregation or historical black congregation, I was going to have to minister to white people. So I went in with my eyes wide open in that respect. So when I did field work, I went to a church where they said to us when we chose our field work sites, at Virginia, we were given 4 churches to look at, 4 opposite churches of each other to look at them and interview and write paper on them. And I chose a church, well, they chose me, I guess, that was not on that list. That was St. Alban's Church in Washington, D.C., which is next to the National Cathedral, where I served for 2 years. So they had 4 priests, 1 seminarian at that church. But it was a very high-powered church. And even though the rector was very liberal and my supervisor was as well, I could tell politically the overwhelming feeling of that congregation was probably neutral to leaning Republican. That was a church where Senator Jack Danforth was a senator and a priest as well. And he served every Tuesday morning. He did the Tuesday morning Eucharist there. And to talk to him, it was just wonderful. He was very supportive, but we didn't really think about politics. There were a lot of folks from the State Department there. As a matter of fact, the head of the lay reader, who trained the lay readers, was the woman who trained the foreign language people who spoke the French languages at the State Department. But I went there to absorb everything I could from that parish and from the seminary, realizing that unless something happened within the 3 years I was away, I was going to return to a predominantly white diocese. Not knowing where I was going to serve, I had to find a way to be prepared. And to be prepared, and this is my language, without prejudice. I didn't come back with any attitude that I'm coming back to fix or solve anything. I came back with an attitude to do ministry. And where I could make a difference, I would try. I would not compromise what I believed as far as social gospels and those kind of things. But I always remembered where I was going to work and do ministry. And many times I've had people from other denominations, even here in Augusta, say to me, well, why did you stay in that church? Oh, we could have made you a bishop if you had come to our church. We could have put you this and the great things you could do. And I'm thinking, that's not where I want to be. I love the church where I am. And I don't know, and it's not for me to make an assessment, I don't think, in this part of the pearly gates, but I hope I've made a difference and been able to work within the frameworks of this church in the best way I could. And I tried to do that at the seminary. So, yeah.
The sense is that you made the choice over and over again that you were not going to be stopped and you were not going to be angry or bitter or about anything that was going on, and that you truly chose to be where you were. Where did that come from? How did you learn that?
Again, I guess from my mom. And I know I talk about my mom a lot, and about my dad, but I did have a father who was in the home. But my mom was a phenomenal person. You know, we come from abject poverty. But my mother never let that stop us. You know, we had one outfit that we wore to church. And it was a white shirt, a black bow tie, and a pair of black pants. And later on, I got a pair of black and white shoes that I got in trouble for because I had to polish them on Saturday nights, and you couldn't let any black polish get on the white part of the shoe. And I always got black on the white, and that got me in trouble. But my mothers would always say, you may be poor, but you don't have to look and act like it. So she made sure that when we went out in public, we were presentable, and you didn't have to make excuses for who you were. Always do your best. So that's where we grew up with that kind of mindset. And so I never thought of competition and that I got to be as good as somebody else. I've always thought that I got to be sure about what I'm doing. And even the part about baptism, because these other kids, you know, you have to have been there. These other kids were bouncing off that mona's bench like the devil was coming after them, and I guess they felt that way. But I'm trying to figure out, you know, y'all telling the minister that y'all heard Jesus tell y'all something through the thunderstorm. I saw this same thunderstorm because in South Georgia, it won every day. And I didn't hear Jesus tell me anything. And then when I couldn't justify it, then I was made to look like an idiot the next year because I was 13 on the mona's bench with the 12-year-olds. They're looking at me saying, what happened to you? Why are you still here? But I had to get it right. I had to get it right before I went to seminary. So I went a year later. So when Bishop Loudon, I believe, asked me a few years later if I felt like I wanted to go back to Alban, I said, no, I don't want to go back there because I love the people where I am. And I've gotten many, many offers to go other places to work. And as I approach my retirement years, I think, well, maybe I should have done that. I would have had more money in my pension fund. But I did not because I've loved the people where I am. And now I have a second congregation. It is so hard to make decisions when I'm given choice to do this or that with one or the other. And it's hard to make. A couple of weeks ago, Liz Williams said the bishop wants to record the Sunday service from St. Albans or Atonement. And I said, which one? She said, it doesn't matter. You pick one. I said, oh, boy. I said, well, if I pick one, can I get the readers from the other one? Well, we did that, but when the bishop gave his prayer in that service, if you all watched it, he didn't mention the people at Atonement. And I got called on the carpet for that. Why did he mention us? I said, oh, I knew that was going to happen. But I love and care for both of them. You know, I was invited to apply for the Bishop of New Jersey. Was that the one that Bishop Bond was in, that diocese? Newark. Years ago, I said no. Nan Pete, who was in Atlanta for a while as a canon to the bishop there for a while, she said, are you ever going to leave Augusta? She said, you know, you could be a bishop almost anywhere in this church. I said, I don't have a calling to be a bishop. And it made me go back to the baptism story and to go to seminary. I never discerned that process for my life. I was content with being a priest. And so much of my priestly ministry, I think I'm even more content than being a deacon. So I got an invitation to apply to be the bishop of Alaska. I said, you gotta be crazy. Alaska? For half of the years and the night, and I gotta get a little puddle jumper to go from church to church. You gotta be crazy. So I haven't got any more invitations to be, but I did get several. You know, the rector of All Saints Atlanta, Pritchard, when he was there before he went to St. John's Divine in New York, he invited me to come and work for him in Atlanta. When what's the name? The dean of the St. Philip's in Atlanta, part of the Coca-Cola family. What's his name?
Sam Candler.
Yeah, Sam Candler. Sam Candler was the dean at Trinity in Columbia for a brief period. He wanted me to come there. I said, no, you guys are powerhouse people. I will come there and get a job with you. You'll be someplace else. And sure enough, Robert Pritchard went to St. John's Divine, New York. Sam Candler went to Atlanta. And where else? Frank Wade, where I'd done my seminary work in D.C., invited me to come back to Washington, where Bishop Ben Hayes ended up being director there before he became bishop of this diocese at that parish. So, but no, I felt content, and for me, it has not been about climbing in the social ladder or status ladder. I've been content at my parish, where when I arrived there almost 30 years ago, there were kids who were 2 years old. Now they're 32 years old. And I'm the only priest I've ever known there. Makes me feel real old. but I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. However, I've told people in the past, if you are thinking about your career in this church, do not stay in one place as long as I've stayed at these churches. I've stayed there because I love my work and I love the people. And with the church with about 30 people in one and about 35 or 40 in the other who come on an average basis, so I'm ministering to about less than 100 people a week. But I can't think of anything else that I would rather do with my life and my ministry than to be with these people. That's when it hurt me so bad after the election when the senior warden said to me, "You're just overly political." And I think you're just buying time till you retire. You don't care about us. And that really cut me to the core because that truly is not the case. But anyway, we're still talking. This person's still the senior warden. And, and we're still minister to each other in love because, as I said then, and I continue to say, when I go to bed at night and say my prayers, and I use our parish roster, I pray for half of the congregation in the morning when I get up, another half in the evening, call them by name. I know all their children because we put their children's name next to their names on the roster, their grandkids, and their animals, their pets. So if Sasha is the dog or the cat in some household, I know who's Sasha because Sasha is important to them. So I pray for them. So, and I say that when I go to bed at night and say my prayers, truly, I may not sleep well at night, but it's not because I'm worried about anything that happened during the day, because I put it behind me. I may take it up the next day because you remind me of it, but I don't go to bed with it on my heart. So I think they have seen that. And my biggest regret over the years is why our churches don't grow. particularly my two congregations, because I love them, and I do believe they love me. And when I have people around this convocation in town, you know, when I was sick, I had so many people, particularly from Good Shepherd, and I know the people at St. Augusta as part of my church family as well. But there were people calling me up and said, "We heard your name on the prayer list. What is wrong?" And so I was telling people over and over, "Well, I have this." And, "Oh, we didn't know that. Why didn't somebody tell us?" Well, I said, "I didn't think it was that important, but it's on the prayer list, and you know now." But there were people who took time to call me up and say that we heard your name on the prayer list, and we want to know what's wrong. So, but anyway, that is in a nutshell. I hope, well, a big old nutshell, I guess, because I've been talking a long time, of how I've tried to live my life in my ministry and in the situations I've been in. Some of them awkward, and some of them I know I cannot duplicate again. But I've always said, when I left St. Albans, D.C., they gave me the run of training that I could do almost anything. I could go to investor meetings, I could go to finance committee meetings, all that stuff. I had access to all of it. And when I set my contract each semester for what I wanted to learn, I would always add this other stuff. And I said, in my diocese, I probably will never have the luxury of having another priest to work with or them work with me. I got to do it all. So I want to know as much as I can know about the way you run this parish, which was the high parish in D.C., as I can. So that when I get back, I won't feel like at a loss. And sure enough, I came back to St. Albans, and within the first year, I was a rector of that parish with no experience. But I didn't feel like I've been thrown into a broad patch without some path to get out, because I truly felt that. I think somebody asked me this question earlier, and I started rambling. But I truly felt that in my discernment process that I was supported by the standing committee and the commission on ministry. I truly felt that. Although at the time when I first met with the standing committee, with the commission on ministry, one of the psychiatrists I didn't realize was a member of my parish to be. And at this meeting, this person didn't say a whole lot. And when I got to St. Albans, the first Sunday, this person sitting up in the church at 8 o'clock. And I had a panic attack. I said, "Oh my God, the psychiatrist followed me. She's still observing me." And I didn't realize this was her parish too. It never said that to me, that, you know, I'm a member of St. Albans, I'll see you in church on Sunday. Just that this person was. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that's that psychiatrist lady. And she has followed me to church. They finally think something's wrong with me, and she's coming to see how I'm going to respond at church. But I've always felt that I may get a lot of stuff wrong, but I feel confident that if I, within the bounds of tradition and the canons, and move forward with some sense of authority and know what I'm doing, the people will trust me and follow me. But if I waver and don't know, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, my very first funeral when I arrived, my very first funeral was a full-scale military funeral. And I had only done the little place in funerals in seminary. And I think the day I did my practicum, I did it with a cremation service. And you watch the other classmates do theirs. But I had a full military funeral. And the person whose husband it was came to me and she said, "Thank you so much for that." And she said, "I want you to know that the whatever the charge officer was, the omnibus man who looked after her, told her that he had not been to a funeral that moved as smoothly and as precise as that service did." And I'm just thinking, well, I don't know any other way to do it. So I'm accused of being obsessive compulsive sometimes. Like I measure the candles every time on the altar to make sure that, even last Monday when we taped that service for the diocese, one of the candles was not burning properly. So when the bishop cut between, I went up and switched candles. And so I think it was, Elena said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Because did you know that flame was too short, the other one was high?" I said, that candle was the one in the camera shot. I didn't want it in the camera shot. She said, "Nobody saw that." I said, "I saw it. And I bet you, as a theater person, somebody in the audience is watching you at all times. They said, be careful on stage because there's somebody who's watching you every moment while you're on stage, whether you think so or not. So I'm always aware of, and this may sound a little vain, I'm aware of the visualness of worship, because some people, they sense or intuit, I think, the holy through their senses. And if the altar is all raggedy, I know I wouldn't want to be there. If I went in there and the candles leaning to one side and they all ran out because the altar people forgot to put oil or change the, whatever it is, you know, we had to get, I know I'm rambling now, but we had to get a oil-filled pastoral candle because they were using the same pastoral candle for like 2 or 3 years. Well, they left it in the sacristy in the stand all through the summer after Easter. And he caused it to kind of lean over to the side. Well, they would bring it out next Easter like nothing was wrong. I said, don't you see this thing is leaning over? We can't use this. But nobody saw that. I said, if I was at a church and I saw this come out of Easter Vigil, I would walk out. Because it says me you don't care about what I think the quintessential service of all year is the Easter Vigil. And thank God, Father said, let me preach at the Easter Vigil this year. I love that service, but we have to do it right, in my opinion. So that's part of my obsessive compulsiveness. And the other part of it is that when I go into the church and the parish hall, the chairs in the parish hall are not lined up around the tables with equal spacing. It drives me crazy. So I have to go in before I do anything else in the morning is to put the chairs at equal spacing. And part of that was when I went to Virginia Seminary. I walked into the back of the chapel and every prayer book, every hymnal was lined up in the back. You see them right in order. Went into the refectory, every chair was on its towel in order. Every chair. And I'm thinking, boy, somebody around here is just as compulsive as I am. I'm going to love it here. So those are some things, but for me, it helps because I tell you, if I went to a place and stuff like that was out of order, it interferes with my being focused. I can focus on a flame in worship while the sermon is going on, but if the other flame is burning crazy out of line, it distracts me. And usually, I very rarely look at the preacher when I'm in the service. I look someplace else to focus as I listen. And it's usually on some object of worship. It's a stained glass window. It's something else that I'm doing. But that is important to me. So I realize that may be something else that's important to people as well.
I'm curious, just with St. Albans. I know that it was the original kind of suburban parish in Augusta, established in the mid-50s, if I'm remembering right, in what was then all white suburbia. What changes have you seen there in your decades at St. Albans in terms of just like the racial composition of the parish? And are those did those give you hope or distress or just what is your take on those?
The racial makeup has changed drastically over the years. When I arrived, and sometimes I'm embarrassed because I think I said this to the CDI people when you all visited at that time. I never really took numbers, but I would guess that the racial makeup when I arrived there was about 80% white and 20% black. And that's just the opposite. And with that, because the numbers were larger, I've had more white funerals than I've had black funerals over the years. And as I bury our white members, I'm thinking, my God, our white parishioners are dying off and they're not being replaced in the same way. And that's a lot of concerns. And I don't know. And the other thing that I used to be more focused on is racial balance, gender balance. If we had 2 lay readers, one had to be a black, one had to be a white. I didn't care which order. Acolytes, we had to have a black kid carrying a torch, a white kid carrying a torch. And I just insist on that. Because I was called out on that one time by a dear woman who's now going to meet her maker. but I loved her, and her name came up today in Bible study because she made rosaries. She made me 2 roses. One was a real rose, but she grinded up the petals and made herself at like a meat grinder. And she made me another one, and I have them with over there. I can show. Anyway, I have them right behind me. Well, I have your prayer beads, Karen. But one morning she came to chew me out. She said, "You got to be more careful. Did you notice anything today?" I said, "No." She said, "It wasn't a white person in this worship this morning. It was all black." Okay, I didn't notice, but she noticed. So I had to be more careful because she was a wonderful lady. I depended on so much of her wisdom. She was the woman, by the way, who kept all the records for the Richmond County Board of Ed. And when her son put her in a nursing home near Atlanta, near Lithonia, and I went to see her the day she died. It was 4th of July that day. I drove to Atlanta and a couple other people to see her. She had Parkinson, and her Parkinson had frozen her body. And I went in to pray with her, and it was so emotional. I wept at her bedside, and I had Janet, Rosalind, Jonelle, and Heidi. There were 4 people with me because I had my car full. It was 3 in the back and 2 in the front. And as we were leaving, I said to them, I want to apologize to you because I know that was very unprofessional for me to cry like that. But this woman has meant a lot to me. She was the only one who could yell at me and say, "You got to be more careful. There were no white people in this service this morning." And I heard her. I didn't hear it as anything racial. Is that it was important for her to make sure that there was a balance because the church was proud of being an integrated parish. But I was not the one who set up the acolytes and the readers. And sometimes they would switch with each other. And that's what happened that Sunday. They didn't think anything about the race issue. They would say, "I can't be there. Can you cover for me?" And they would just do it. But I was the one who got blamed for it. And so one of the ladies, Jonelle, said, "I am so glad I saw you cry because I know you love us." Well, we drove back to Augusta, and her son sent me an email and said that, "I think my mom was waiting for your visit. The nurse called me and told me what time she died. And y'all had to have just left." I said, "Yeah, we left around 1:30. He said, "Yeah, when y'all left, she died." And and the other person I may have shared with you that I cried at the funeral was the white couple who told me that they didn't want me there when I was being called. And when I buried them, I actually cried at their funerals because I really think that couple, even though they were honest with me up front, and their reason was that they could not worship in a black church. And I think if you come here, this will become a black church. But I do believe that if a dinosaur had attacked me, the 2 of them would have jumped on the dinosaur and slay it if it was attacking me. So we had, and part of that, I think, is trust. And when people don't see you as a threat, because I was there to minister to them and to love them, and with no family in Augusta, all my family is in South Georgia, I always felt that I was supported and loved by them. Like I have felt with all of our congregations here in Augusta, that I have a connection with all of them. It's not just my parish, but I think I know someone in all of our parishes that I can say, if I wasn't here, I could worship here. And I could feel at home at any of these congregations. And there's only one historically black congregation in Augusta, and that's St. Mary's. But I feel I could worship in any of these congregations if I was not a priest, or if after retirement, I could make another congregation my home, any one of them, I could feel at home with them. And I hope that's because no one see me as partisan or loyal to any one racial group or any one demographic. I choose to live where my congregation people live. And I had a person said who was in training once who said to me, "I would never live where you live." I said, "Well, I would never live there." And I said, "Well, this is where the people live. I have no problem living here. I live halfway between both our congregations, and it is in what would be the working part of Augusta. And as John, you know, when you get south of Gordon Highway, it's called south of Augusta. And South Augusta means something else to a lot of people in this town, whether you're in West Augusta or South Augusta, or even East Augusta. When you hear those terms, they mean something about the demographics of the place. And I live 2.6 miles to one, 2.5 miles to the other, right smack between the two. And I think I told Karen that this morning, this is my first week back at work, and I go to atonement on Wednesdays, and I went to St. Albans this morning. And I got over there, and I'm thinking, my key doesn't work, but I had taken my atonement key out when I got out of the car to open the door at atonement, but I was at St. Albans and it didn't work. And I realized, oh, today is Wednesday, I'm at the wrong place. So, but I hope this makes sense. But yeah, that's been my life as a priest and as a pastor. And I do see myself as a pastor. I take my diaconal part of my my ministry very serious. Because I truly think that for ordained people, your diaconal role, this is for me, is the most important part of what I do. The consecration is very important. But I think so much of what I do as far as a pastor boils down to the diaconal work. And I don't mind getting my hands dirty doing diaconal work. So, and I'm always remembering proud of my diaconal ordination on the Feast of St. Barnabas on June 11th. That's why I know that when this June 11th comes, it'll be 4 years since I had a speeding ticket, because I got a ticket on my deacon anniversary 4 years ago. But I do love what I do. And I guess one of my hesitations when Dean Marcus said we want to honor you at the seminary, I don't know if my family would understand that. Because sometimes I think my family, they know that I'm a minister and they're proud of that. And this may be my stuff that I carry in my head. But sometimes I think they may think that I'm a sellout for joining this, what they would say as a white church. So I'm very careful when I talk to them. Even my high school classmates, when we've been planning this reunion, they often ask me to pray, and my prayers are more like collects than they are like those prayers that begin with Father God, and you said Father God 25 times in a 2-minute prayer. That drives me crazy. And one day someone said, oh, thank God somebody gave a short prayer today. But after a while, they stopped asking me to pray. So I said, well, maybe they had a meeting behind the scenes and said they want some more Father Gods in there, and I'm not giving them enough of that in their prayer. But also, I have never been one to, if I'm back home, particularly I go back to family funerals and those kind of things, I don't try to fit into what they're doing. I'm very proud of my being an Episcopal priest. I wear collars there. And when they get carried away with the, I don't know how many black churches you guys have been in, but sometimes they are real small. And they love to have a microphone turned up to the loudest decibel. You just burst your ears open, and I can't deal with that. So I'm not afraid to put my hands on my ears when it gets too loud. So, and that kind of stuff. But I don't get up and jump around and dance and shout back at the minister. I just don't do it. So if they invite me to come sit up front with them, they got to realize I'm going to sit there and listen. I'm not going to jump up and shout back at the minister and say amen real loud. I'm not going to do that. So I'm proud of who I am, and I honor that. But I don't criticize them likewise. So.
We not asked you something that you would like to tell us about. Have we missed anything? Is there something that's important to you that we haven't asked or heard?
I think it would be of everything I've said about the church and observed in the church and even in society, I still stay with this church and love this church because it is the church. And I think if there's any hope, it'll come through the church. I really believe that. Or through the tenets and principles of the church, whether people know that they're acting on that or not. One of the things I say a lot, and I think I've said it once this week as well, is that it does not matter to me if you choose not to take my life because you are afraid to spend the rest of your life in prison, or if you believe in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. I don't care which one. I get to live because you obey one of them, or maybe both of them. And I think people of the church, whether we see people who are not of church or religious leanings, I think we have a lot to do to bring peace and order and concord to the world through our actions so that they can do the right thing and be about healing, whether they believe it was from church folk or not. Because in the end, it doesn't matter if we learn how to love each other. It's just so interesting, all of our readings these last few weeks, even including this, would have to do about love and abiding in the vine, if you love me, all of these things. How many times, 8 or 9 times, where you can go to different references in the scripture where you have the exact same words about love. And I shared it with the Bible study today. When I left Atonement Sunday, that's my second church, so I leave. And I usually stop by the little deli up not too far from Atonement to get something to eat because I've discovered that I can't eat late on Saturday nights and nothing in the mornings or drink anything because it makes my stomach run. It really moves if I get liquids, especially warm things like coffee. So if I can get through the morning without having to constantly empty this pouch, it's better for me with vestments on. So I stopped by the deli on the way from Atonement to home, and the lady who was getting my food, she said, "Oh, are you a pastor?" And I have to hold my tongue. Am I a pastor? You see a collar around my neck. What's about this don't make you think that I'm a pastor? You know, I just happen to dress this way for fun. So I said, yes, I am. She said, well, tell me a good word. And I said, God is love. And she said, oh, that's deep. And I said, if it's not about love, it's not about God. Well, all of you know where that came from. And she said, oh, wow, can I write that down? And I said, yes, if you're here next week, I can bring you a book with it in there. What's the title of a book? But it's that little word, and Bishop Curry has made that so popular. And I remember after the wedding, he said that everybody asked him about this thing. He said, I'm surprised they had not heard that before. That it's all about love. It's all about love. So to tell this woman who says, you know, give me a good word, I just said God is love. And she kind of looked like, well, I've heard that before. Then she said, oh, that's deep. And I said, well, if it's not about love, it's not about God. And she just went crazy. And she put all this food on my plate. I said, oh, no, that's too much. That's too much. She said, I have to treat the preacher good because he gave me a good word. So anyway, I love what I do. And I think I shared with you once before that I wear a collar a lot in this town when I travel around because I think it's important that the kids see me with a collar on. And no, I don't sleep in it. I don't wear it all the time at home, but I do wear it when I go out because I think it is important that that people see me and know if it has ever crossed their mind that they could be a priest too. And I wait for them to ask me a question, and I just wait to answer their question and have a chat with them. But anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Father Billy. I think that's a wonderful note to close on. We appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us, not once, but twice. There was a lot to reflect on, so thank you again.
And I thank all of you, particularly for listening, and I would love to see how you decipher this into some cogent kind of words. So thank you.
Thank you.